Hello everyone, it's lunchtime here at the Newseum in Washington, D.C., and I hope you are ready to go deeper with us and the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for CHOW 2015. I'm your host, Kate Thompson from NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries for Capitol Hill Ocean Talk, live right here at oceanslive.org. Don't forget that you can become part of the conversation, even if you aren't in D.C. today. Tweet us questions with hashtag CHOW 2015 and chat with us on oceanslive.org. All week, every session of CHOW and Capitol Hill Ocean Talk has emphasized the importance of coalitions. From how we secure our coasts to America's energy agenda to managing protected marine species, the nation's leaders in ocean policy collectively recognize the need to organize broad groups of stakeholders. Ultimately, coalitions can present a single, united message with the power to mobilize resources for action. Today, we will talk about what it takes to form a successful coalition and look at two areas where communities came together to form coalitions that submitted nominations to NOAA's sanctuary nomination process. We'll talk about the coalition in Wisconsin that created the nomination for an area in Lake Michigan, and a coalition in Maryland, right here off our shores, that put together the nomination for Mallows Bay and Potomac River. First, we have my fellow colleague, Matt Brookhart, the Acting Deputy Director of NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. Matt has worked at both headquarters and in the West Coast region for the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. Next, we have another one of my colleagues, Dr. Billy Causey, the Regional Director for the Southeast Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean region at the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. Since 1983, Billy previously managed National Marine Sanctuaries in the Florida Keys. Representing the Lake Michigan nomination, we have Tom Mlada, the Mayor of Port Washington, Wisconsin. During his first three-year term in office, Mayor Mlada focused on advancing city-led efforts in sustainability, balanced economic development, and public engagement. In April 2015, he was re-elected to another three-year term. And on behalf of Mallows Bay Potomac River nomination, we are joined by Joel Dunn, the President and CEO of the Chesapeake Conservancy. Prior to joining the Chesapeake Conservancy, Joel conducted government relations and project management in the Chesapeake region for the Conservation Fund. In 2010, Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment gave Joel its Rising Star Award for his work in conservation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today on Capitol Hill Ocean Talk.
Nice.
I'm excited to talk about all the great things that you all have going on. So Matt, to begin on all of this, can you tell us a little bit about the nation's National Marine Sanctuary system?
Sure.
And what is a National Marine Sanctuary?
Yes, what is a National Marine Sanctuary? Well, a National Marine Sanctuary, as we define it, is an area of the marine environment or the Great Lakes environment that has national significance. And what that means is an area that has a biological resource, a natural resource such as a coral reef in the Florida Keys, or a cultural resource such as a shipwreck as we see in Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And these are not just your average, everyday resource. These are resources that have long-standing, very high status in terms of their contributions both ecologically and historically to our nation.
So the word sanctuary, a lot of people are like, wait a minute, that means hands off. So can you tell us it's not really a sanctuary in that way of thinking?
Well, that's true. The way that the National Marine Sanctuary system operates, if you will, or is managed, is for the primary purpose of resource conservation, but we are also a multiple use federal agency, and that means we look to promote the types of uses that are compatible with resource protection, but that often means that these are areas of great recreational value and can be areas of even great commercial value. And so that's part of the balance that we undertake as we act as the stewards for the sanctuary system.
Well, we have 13 National Marine Sanctuaries and 1 National Marine Monument. So can these change? Once they're designated, can anything happen to them after they're designated?
Yes, yeah. So I would submit that the National Marine Sanctuaries are known for a very robust public process. And by that I mean when things do change, we engage with our local stakeholders and constituencies and the communities and where these places matter. And we talk it through with them to best understand how things are changing in terms of the needs of these communities and how the resources themselves are changing. So for example, when we propose a regulation, that is done in concert with the community. When we propose an expansion of a sanctuary, that usually bubbles up from the community itself. So we are a very community-driven, very public-driven federal agency, and that's become, I think, a very strong bedrock of how we manage.
So speaking of these places, some exciting things have happened recently with three of our sanctuaries. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned expansions, and expansions, again, are things that come to us as sort of voiced from the public. We have something called a Sanctuary Advisory Council at every one of our sanctuaries, and the advisory councils are community-based, diverse groups that folks who volunteer their time to provide advice and recommendations to the sanctuary superintendent. At times during the life cycle of a sanctuary, the advisory councils may recommend something like expansion, and we listen. We talk about it with them and how we might go forward with that. And that's what's happened in 3 different sanctuaries over the last several years. Most recently, Gulf of the Farallones, Cordell Bank off of San Francisco, we just found out on Tuesday that that became effective in terms of an expansion of both sanctuaries. It totals about 3 times their size. And similarly, off of Alpena, Michigan, the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, that went from about 400 square miles to 4,000 square miles, and now incorporates several additional communities up the coast: Rogers City, Sheboygan, Michigan, Presque Isle, as part of that public process and a part of the Sanctuary Advisory Council process. So we're very excited about all this.
Yeah, extremely exciting. And speaking of Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, we'd like to take a break from the discussion for a moment to roll an Earth is Blue video showcasing the expansion of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. This video is from the community perspective of a one-time opponent turned advocate of the sanctuary system. Let's take a look.
And they're going to tell you what to do with what you have here. You know, give me a break. And they wanted to encompass a huge area. We, of course, objected. Were we going to be restricted in any way diving any of these wrecks? And if so, was it going to cost us money? And what if we found a new one? Who's going to take ownership of it, so as to speak, when in reality it was ours to dive anyway, because that's just the point of view we had with it? Yeah, we were pretty vocal in terms of telling NOAA to go home. Northwestern is a shipwreck about 5 to 7 miles off Rogers City. It had a lot of pottery on it, a lot of great stuff, and it disappeared one day. Those kinds of experiences for me over the years, to see that stuff missing, it was amazing how fewer people wanted to dive that wreck once those artifacts were gone. You know, when the law changed, I changed. My feeling is it should be in a place like this.
So one of the great things about our visitor center, and you'd probably agree with me, is that it's bringing the bottom of the lake up to the general public. So people get to come here, learn about the artifacts, and even for people who can't scuba dive or snorkel or kayak over the wrecks, they get to enjoy these wonderful resources.
But there's a greater thing that's happening that I see, and that is that people are getting together, that we are recapturing that history, that we are unifying these 3 counties. Yes, in a goal to attract tourism, but at the same time, we're going to see each other in a little bit different light. One of my favorite things to do on any wreck that has some kind of an intact bow is to go down the bow to the bottom, stand on the bottom some distance away, and just let it run you over. Now this is going to become part of the sanctuary. The sanctuary ends way up that way at the end, the northern end of Presque Isle County, and goes all the way over to the international border between the United States and Canada. So basically, as far as you can see in any direction right now, you are within the boundaries of the sanctuary. So it's an excellent, excellent feeling.
So although expansions were just highlighted in that video, we're going to get back to nominations. And so 1 year ago today, actually at CHOW 2014, Councilor the President John Podesta announced the opening of a new sanctuary nomination process. Matt, what does it mean to be nominated?
Yeah, so this is a very, very exciting thing for us, but also I think for the American public. So yeah, this time last year, Mr. Podesta announced the new sanctuary nomination process, and that's exactly what it is. It is the process by which the American public can recommend to NOAA there are special areas around the marine and Great Lakes environments that they feel are worthy of National Marine Sanctuary designation.
We actually have a graphic right here.
Yes, that
so
is
can you talk us through what that means right there?
So yeah, when you see the graphic, one thing we really like to highlight here is all the little stick figures, the people, right? Because this is designed, unlike its predecessor, it's designed to be a very grassroots, democratic, bottom-up process. This is a community-driven process by which communities band together and all the diverse interests within those communities to put forward a nomination to us to consider for designation. Once that nomination comes to us, though, it doesn't just disappear within the federal government. We have built into this process a means by which we can stay in consultation with the community, as we've done with both Tom and Joel and their respective communities, to work through that nomination to ensure that it has sort of the best fighting chance, if you will, to survive to what we call the inventory. And the inventory is that area where we hold those nominations that have met our criteria, and we may in the future be able to consider for sanctuary designation.
So you mentioned community. So us as the government agency just doesn't come in and say, wow, you've got great resources, let's protect them.
No, in fact, it's just the opposite. Certainly within the process, there are criteria that need to be met. And the criteria are, frankly, fairly stringent, right? We are talking about national marine sanctuaries here. But those serve as guideposts for the community to develop these nominations themselves. We have turned this back over to the American public so that they may weigh in as they see appropriate. And anything's fair game, as long as the criteria are articulated clearly to us. Anything, whether it's a biological resource, coral reefs, as I mentioned, to seagrass areas off of California or Oregon, perhaps, to the cultural resources that we are also mandated to protect.
Right. So, NOAA, what's happened since the year ago when NOAA decided to open this door? Yeah,
there's been a lot of buzz about this. I think we're happy to see that. And in fact, we have received 6 formal nominations. 2 of them we have deemed for accepted into the inventory, as I mentioned. These are 2 that we may now consider for sanctuary designation. These are the 2 that both Tom and Joel will talk to you about a little bit in a second. And then the others that we have received, we felt for different reasons that they did not either provide us enough information or perhaps did not meet the criteria as we've articulated, but it doesn't end there. So if we decline a nomination, that community can resubmit that nomination after they have gone through a letter of rationale that we submit as to why we felt as submitted it wasn't up to par.
So if a community is interested, say they're watching right now, and they say, oh, we have this great resource off our shoreline, what do they do? How do they go about doing it?
The best way to do it is to go to nominate.noaa.gov. It's a phenomenal website, thanks to you and your team, and it's very effective in terms of simply clarifying the process, gives you everything you need to know about the process, and everything also that's already been submitted is made available on that website. So if you want to see how other folks have gone about it, go right there.
Okay, so Billy, you have been with NOAA since 1983.
That's right.
Whether at the site level or the regional level, but you came to us prior to working for NOAA. You actually were an opponent yourself.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Between about 1976 and 1981, I was working on the water. I was a marine biologist, but making a living collecting marine life and doing what I could like a commercial fisherman. And this new idea came in, this sanctuary. And like so many people react, I, along with many in the community in the Florida Keys, reacted negatively. But being a scientist first, I did my homework and I studied the National Marine Sanctuary Act. And I realized that it was the best piece of legislation I'd ever seen. And if you follow that act, and if you really watch it closely, we protect the resources, we keep a pulse on the health of the resources that the community continues to use. So my fears went away, and I actually became a very strong proponent. And now, I think we're in the most exciting period of the history of sanctuaries since I joined.
Well, your region has 3 of some of the most amazing places, sanctuaries in our system, including the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary, and Flower Garden Banks, one of my personal favorite dive destinations. So can you tell us, a little bit about some of the things in those 3 sites?
Absolutely. We were talking about the boundary expansion. Each of the sanctuaries, as Matt said, have sanctuary advisory councils. The Sanctuary Advisory Council at Flower Gardens said, look, we're ready to expand. And actually, they formed a working group that was chaired by oil and gas representatives on the advisory council, and they started looking at other banks and pinnacles. Now, these areas are way offshore. The Flower Garden banks are 100 miles due south of the Texas-Louisiana border. So we started looking at, the advisory council recommended some areas that we should start expanding into. So we just recently took public comment. The public comment came in overwhelmingly positive. So there we're looking at boundary expansion. In the Florida Keys, that was the first congressionally designated sanctuary. Now, we've talked about the process. We used to take nominations, a single letter with about 3 paragraphs could nominate a site, and they would go on a site evaluation list. But now we have this process that is far improved to bring the communities together, to get the communities motivated, and to have them actually coming to us. That's right now, the Florida Keys is going through a similar process to revise some of the regulations. Gray's Reef off the Georgia coast, beautiful place, beautiful site. It's a small sanctuary, and they're looking up the coast at some other areas to include.
Well, great. In your region in particular, have communities submitted any nomination packages?
Yes, we've had one package that was submitted, and it was from the area off of northeast Florida. It's called the Eubelina Oculina National Marine Sanctuary, proposed title.
Oh my gosh, I
Oh,
thought
yeah,
Papahanaumokuakea was bad. Jeez, Billy.
It's a mouthful, but it's the calving area of the right whale.
Yeah.
It's a very important environmentally sensitive area. There are a lot of maritime heritage resources. There's a lot of unique resources in the area, but the very topic that we're discussing, the local support and the community support, was not broad enough, and it was deemed in the first process that we needed to broaden that community support. And I cannot emphasize how important it is to do these from the bottom up. Yeah. And I'm currently working in Puerto Rico. I went down, just got back from a trip there, where the community of Puerto Rico wants some sanctuaries. They're very excited about it, but that's one place where you have to work from the bottom up. It cannot be seen as top down because they want to do it from their community. So it's essential, and we stress the importance of them building a very broad base of support and generating a package. They've already formed a steering committee, and they're starting to work on their nomination package now. We have other areas. They've called us. They say they're interested in sanctuary nomination. We point them to the website, and our role is to stay back and to really just sort of be there to provide advice. We're not in there doing the nomination, and that's something that we have to make crystal clear to the audience, to everyone that's listening, is that this is a community-driven process. This is not NOAA driving this bus.
So speaking of communities and community-driven processes, you mentioned 2 that were successful. We're lucky to have in studio today 2 of those successful nominations. Tom, you're the mayor of Port of Washington, Wisconsin. Joel, you're the president and CEO of the Chesapeake Conservancy. So before we talk about your individual nominations, let's talk about the road to nomination that Matt was just referencing earlier. Do you remember how you learned about the nomination announcement? Joel?
Oh yeah, we heard from when John Podesta made an announcement that they were going to reopen the process. We were thrilled, and the modification of the process to be a community-led, community-driven model is exciting to us. I run a conservation organization, nonprofit, that is driven by community-based conservation priorities. And so Mallows Bay, Potomac River is a huge community conservation priority in our restoration and conservation efforts. And our community rallied around the concept of proposing it as a national marine sanctuary. In fact, we were actually working on a national historic designation for Mallows Bay, Potomac River at the same time that Mr. Podesta made the announcement. So, which we subsequently received, by the way, on April 24th, which is great. But we then launched a steering committee and a community to drive a nomination forward.
Great. And Tom?
Yeah, and so for Wisconsin, credit where credit is due. I mean, really this community-based and this democratic grassroots effort really started years ago. And because of that, and really that was a back and forth interplay between NOAA staff, including Ellen Brody, Great Lakes Regional Coordinator, and really representatives from throughout all of the different communities involved in our regional nomination. So it's always been regional based. City of Port Washington, obviously I'm a representative there, but our friends up in Sheboygan to the north and the Manitowoc and Two Rivers as you go up the coastline. So represented about 80 miles of Wisconsin shoreline in the central part of the state. Really from that standpoint, as that interplay began, I think there was immediate excitement in terms of generating that investment within the stakeholder group. And I think from the outset, there was a belief that there was something for everybody in this. Again, obviously the focus on this from the Great Lakes standpoint is archaeological preservation. I mean, certainly it's shipwreck focused. But what's so fantastic is you're really bringing into focus the Great Lakes ecosystem at a time when there's some pressure on that ecosystem. So critical to our nation, obviously, and frankly the world, with 25% of the freshwater supply. And so really from a standpoint of everybody looking at it and I think saying, again, from archaeological preservation to education to research and exploration to all aspects of recreational opportunities, tourism and economic development, we can get behind this. We can get really excited about the impact to our communities.
Right. Joel, the Chesapeake's kind of a difficult place when it comes to governments, and lots of different states have lots of different stakes in the Chesapeake. So speaking of that, how the heck did you start brainstorming your list of stakeholders and supporters to put this package in?
Well, let me first say the Chesapeake is a national treasure.
It
and
is. Not a difficult place,
a
a beautiful place.
place.
But when it comes to governments is what I was talking about.
For sure. Well, Mallows Bay is a place of magic and wonder and history and heritage, and it's so exciting to see. This fellow named Don Chomet wrote a book on Mallows Bay. And when he heard about this announcement, he approached the chairman of the Chesapeake Conservancy, which was then Charlie Steck, who's been a leader in our community for years in making parks and wildlife refuges and trails. And he said, Charlie, I know my history, but I don't know policy. How can you help me advance a community-led initiative here? Charlie met with Steve Bunker from the Nature Conservancy, and they brought in folks from the education community, the tourism community, the American Indian community, which has a huge multi-thousand-year history at Mallows Bay and the surrounding landscape, historical societies, locally elected officials. In fact, the chairman of the Charles County Commission, a man named Peter Murphy, is a huge advocate for this because he sees the economic, environmental, and education potential. So we put together a steering committee composed of members of that group, and we subsequently identified a list of groups that we needed to reach out to and educate about our interests. And we, over a several-month period, then made several calls and visits to people like DOD at Quantico up the river to make sure that they understood what we were trying to accomplish. And over time, we generated a cacophony of support for this nomination. And for the Mallows Bay Potomac River, it's a crown jewel, and we're really thrilled that our nomination made it through the first step in the process, and we're looking forward to continuing to advance that.
It is a very, very cool place, and take your kayak so you can see the amazing wrecks that are there. So Tom, I have been going up to Wisconsin. I've had a cabin up in northern Wisconsin since before I was born. Every year we go up, and I just happened to walk into a dive shop up there, and it was really amazing that he asked me what I did and where I was going diving, and I told him what I did for a living, and he said, oh my gosh, we want to have one of those off of our shoreline. Are you guys going to make that happen? And I said, well, yeah, just, you need to make your voice heard and become part of that community discussion as a local diver. But, I started up at Thunder Bay, and it definitely was not like that when I went up there and I started working to make the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary happen. They actually did not. They were huge opponents of the federal government coming in and putting their feet into their waters. So was there any, difficulty in rallying support for your package?
No, and again, I'll use Alpena. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that really provided for us the model. And I obviously know that there was an awful lot of legwork and time that went in there to really ensure that kind of stakeholder support and investment. But it paid off. It paid off in terms of a fantastic facility there, obviously, and now obviously an expanded sanctuary and a great group that's really leading that forward, including Jeff Gray and his staff. So that provided for us, I think, really the model. And again, each individual unique community in Wisconsin, the four that are really comprising this regional nomination, even though we have those unique elements, I mean, it's really been collaborative and it's been supportive throughout. And so I think to your point in Minocqua, I think that's why this message has resonated throughout the state. You know, we have in Wisconsin, of course, we've got Senator Johnson and Senator Baldwin. And for those who follow politics, you know, admittedly, probably two of the more disparate politicians in their views, but both have been champions of this effort. And Governor Walker, similar to in Maryland where the governor advanced this, Governor Walker in Wisconsin advanced hers too. So I know, as Joel would say, this isn't just a, you know, for us a regional effort, it's not a local effort, it's a state benefit, it's a state effort, and I think the state has embraced it. And I think when you get that sense of collective pride, and that's that sense of collective ownership, that's what really drives these things forward and gets everybody behind it.
You know, and I think from our perspective, from the federal government's perspective, and as Billy mentioned, in the way that we devised this process, what we've seen from both the communities that Tom and Joel represent, that this is how the process should work, right? Is that it does have the diversity of interest. It's been driven by the community. It's been a fairly stepwise and I guess methodical process, right? Well thought through. And that's really what we had envisioned for this in conjunction with these communities. And when we did this rulemaking, you know, we received a lot of comments, more than we normally do on this thing, upwards of 18,000 comments. Wow. A lot of which were very supportive of this concept of it needs to be driven at a grassroots democratic level. And I think these guys are demonstrating that very strongly.
It really tracks conservation trends. I mean, the old days of the big dogs doing it by themselves are over. You know, the new trend is to walk into a funder like the Campbell Foundation that has supported our work on this, or a government agency, and have 1,000 voices of support behind your conservation initiative. So it really does track national trends.
Right.
Yeah, and go ahead, I'm sorry, Bill.
Well, one thing I want to say is right now we're experiencing a great deal of excitement. And I think a lot of that is that communities have confidence in us now. Whereas in the past, our program wasn't really that well known. And we're just starting to articulate who we are. We are a multiple use management program. You talked about that. Our job, I see our job as keeping people in business that are making their living off of those resources in those communities. And I think the people around the coastal waters of the U.S. and the Great Lakes are now seeing that in sanctuaries, and they trust that we're going to do the right thing, work with them.
And I would just sort of build off that because it's such a great point and is well offered by Joel. Matt kind of touched on this before. I think what really helps communities have that level of confidence is that the visibility is sustained. You know, the partnership is ongoing, it's continuous. It's not something where you submit your nomination and then you hear back and that's the end of the day. I mean, truly, there's been ongoing partnership, and it's appropriately balanced, so that for those folks who might feel like it is top-down, no, in fact, it isn't. And obviously, again, that visibility represents that. It's just the right balance of it, but it is continuous. It's there at all aspects. It's a true support system. I think system's really the key word. I mean, everything that you would associate with system, community, place, I mean, those are the things that really come with this relationship as we advance nominations. And, you know, for us, as we look at, you know, 110 letters of support as part of our nomination, Joel makes a great point. I think what we were so proud of on that is the range. So you had one from the governor, you had one from our 2 senators, you had some from local officials, you had some from all of your organizations, but you also had some from individuals. You had some from folks who just at each individual level, community level, said, this is something we've got to champion and get behind for all the right reasons.
I think that that's a good point, Tom, because like when I first walked into Alpena, it was a rundown community that had just had paper plants shut down, and that was their lifeblood. They didn't want to be like the other side of the state where tourism took over everything and that's all it was. They wanted to keep their uniqueness about their community, but yet they also needed jobs. They also needed some kind of something to happen to give them that spark. And their business communities and their tourism communities said, this is our spark, come on guys, we gotta have it, we need it. And so I think that's what happened in Alpena, and Alpena has changed 100% for the better with a new visitor center and impacts with education and research programs. And when you tell me a little bit about the other side, on Lake Michigan side of the Great Lakes, can you tell me a little bit about what's so unique about your area that you submitted? Because I know there was a bunch of areas in Wisconsin that they were looking at, but how did you come to that 875 square mile area that you submitted?
So our Historical Society in Wisconsin, along with Coastal Management, has really been great partners on the state level with this. And you're right, as we took a look, or as they took a look, I should say, at really the landscape within Wisconsin, I think the feeling was there are some areas of the state that might have more definable shipwrecks, but that this was an area that was really untapped. So we have 34 identified shipwrecks at this point, including the 2 oldest in the state of Wisconsin, 14 with intact masts. But we know of another 120 to about 140 ships, vessels that went missing at one point in time in this area. So we know there's going to be an awful lot of discovery in the time to come. And again, what's great about that is the relationship back and forth with our dive community, with others who are looking for these incredible archaeological treasures, and really collectively us wanting to embrace the cause of preserving them for future generations. You know that those discoveries are going to be done right. So I think that's where, when you looked at this area off the coastline, you could say, boy, it's accessible to people from a geographical standpoint. We're within some major metropolitan centers. And that really allows us to, I love to invoke Ellen Brody with her remark that you bring the lake and its assets to the people. And we're so spoiled. I've been in Wisconsin, lived my 37 of my 39 years along the coastline. That is not everybody's experience. And so to be able to say, we can bring some of that to the people is really critical as we try to maintain and steward these resources.
Perfect. Well, Joel, the Chesapeake, besides just being an amazing estuary, it also, the history of the Chesapeake is some of the first of our nation.
And even before that,
Yeah.
the Native American history
Yeah.
in the Chesapeake Bay is fascinating. And the site at Mallows Bay has a collection of history from the Native Americans, the Piscataway, Kanoi, which still have a thriving community today, all the way up to today. And there's over 100 shipwrecks there. From World War I, they were steamships that were built and then subsequently sunk there. What's great about Mallows Bay, Potomac River, is you can kayak by these shipwrecks at low tide, and they've become these wildlife meccas. I mean, you got osprey nesting on them, herons. They are reefs for fish. It's a great bass fishery. I mean, I was just out there the other day, and I was talking with a bunch of guys that go fishing there regularly. They love it because it's so much fun, and they just pull them right in. But also it's got a National Historic Trail running right through the middle of it, the Captain John Smith National Historic Trail, and a series of state parks and federal parks around the shoreline. So it's really accessible to people. And the Chesapeake, just like you were mentioning, our shoreline is mostly private. So it's really hard to get out to the Chesapeake, to love the bay, so that you're inspired to vote for the bay and donate to the bay or commit your career to the bay. So places like Mallows Bay, Potomac River give people access, and it inspires their imagination and inspires them to do conservation. For us, that's a major motivating factor. For our community, it also fuels an economy, a sustainable economy. Renting kayaks, going out for lunch after you go fishing, staying at the local bed and breakfast or hotels. I mean, there is a real economic reason in addition to ecological and history for Mallows Bay, Potomac River.
So I have a question for all of you. What are the most important elements of a successful coalition generally? Billy, let's go with you first.
I would say diversity of groups. I would say the passion of the groups. And it's not just the conservation community, but it may be the maritime community. But I think the success comes from diversity.
Matt.
I would add to that longevity, right? I think that we all living and working in this city know about political winds and the changing political winds, and as those coalitions form, the depth and strength of those coalitions I think often equates to a longevity, and that's important because sometimes these processes take some time, and that will only help.
Joel.
I'd say common goals and interests. I mean, finding the common goal between the Historical Society, the schools, the local county commissioner, the governor, and finding those common values and goals, I think, is key to sustaining or building and sustaining a successful coalition.
Right. And Tom?
I think, so I'll build off of all of these, but I think messaging is really critical too. I think from a standpoint of getting people to understand, instilling at the base level, and then really building that up, the importance of sustainability and stewardship, that those things are a collective cause, that they're not a sometimes thing, but that we all have a charge in those efforts, if you will, and that those things really permeate all aspects of our communities. Again, not just the environmental and conservation aspect of things, but really the economic side of things as well, and that we all benefit, that you can have economy, you can have environment, those things coexisting, and frankly, not just coexisting, but really being successful and thriving.
Right. So I'm going to end it with that scuba diver up in your Minocqua. Can an individual make change? Can an individual, can it not just be the community and, I mean, you're the mayor. I mean, you're an individual and you make change every day and build coalitions every day, but can the average scuba diver Joe from Lake Tomahawk or Minocqua make change as well?
Oh, I think absolutely. Actually, Billy, you're a great example of that. One person really taking the time to invest of themselves, to learn more about this process, to learn what sanctuaries can mean to a community, and then to really have an open mind about the conversation. And from there, upon deciding and really coming to a conclusion, an educated conclusion, say, I'm going to help be a proponent for this. I'm going to help sell this to the larger base. And as you alluded to, Joel, I mean, that is all aspects of the community, and there's just no doubt about it.
Right. So you can make change. You can be part of the process. You can go to nominate.noaa.gov, check it out, see if your community can get together and build a coalition and nominate a sanctuary site. So the emergence of community advocacy is certainly the force prevalent in activism today. Gentlemen, we greatly appreciate the time you've taken to be with us today and share your own experiences with Oceans Live. Maybe you have even inspired other regions to look at what's special about where they live and how their resources can be managed better. Whether it's as potential marine protected areas or through a marine debris cleanup like in Mallows Bay, coalitions have and will continue to make it happen. We're rounding out the last day of CHOW 2015. Stay tuned to the schedule immediately following Capitol Hill Ocean Talk for more programming information. I'll see you back here at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Capitol Hill Ocean Talk and Oceans Live. I'm Kate Thompson, and thank you for watching.